Welcome to the Mostro Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Bingham, and today we're diving into the fascinating world of music and technology with our special guest, Tristra Yeager. Tristra is a master storyteller and content strategist known for her insights at the marketing agency Rock, Paper, Scissors. I'm thrilled to explore her innovative approaches to storytelling in the digital age. Let's get started. Thank you, Tristra Yeager, for being with us on the Mostro Podcast today. It is such a pleasure.
I'm excited to talk to you. I'm sure we're going to have a blast.
Yes, this is great. And I think, so we met last year in 2023.
Yes.
South by Southwest. And actually, our first conversation turned into my podcast interview, my interview on your podcast, Music Tectonic.
Yes, and that was really fun. It was because I was incompetent. I had my voice recorder with me and somehow didn't record our original conversation, which would have been a little rocky in terms of audio anyway. And so that gave me an excuse to be like, hey, Kim, let's have a longer convo in a place where I can actually hear your wonderful thoughts. And I thought the episode turned out brilliantly, and it was really great to get to know you a little bit more.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. And likewise, it was such a pleasure to get to know you more. You're so brilliant, academic, strategic storyteller, all of this. And so I want to dig into your brain, Tristra, for the benefit of everyone listening today. Yeah. Okay. So as a master storyteller, I want to ask you about adapting narratives. In your work, you often discuss the power of storytelling in music and tech. How do you adapt traditional storytelling techniques in a rapidly evolving digital landscape without compromising the core message?
That's a really good question. And the interesting thing is that I think you're going to have to answer it for yourself. So if you're an artist and you, for instance, really love using TikTok, I don't personally, but I know people who do and really get into it. And it's a lot of fun for them. And it's a creativity affirming practice. Then, you have to think about your medium. So a platform may suggest a medium, or you yourself, like your music itself, may suggest how the story needs to be crafted. So if you base a lot of your work on improvisation, or if you are a beat maker, the way you approach story is going to be really different. And I love to counsel people to be, there's a word I've been using a lot lately, which is unmercenary, meaning you're not thinking about the mercantile aspect of what you're doing first. Often I feel like our advice is to speak to the market, to think about how do you get the fans engaged. But, nowadays, there's 1,000 things people could choose to engage themselves. There's 1,000 people pandering to them. Don't pander. Think about how you'd love your story to connect to somebody. And there's somebody out there who probably wants to connect with that story, especially if it's coming from a place that is unique and enthusiastic, inspired, or inspiring. So that's sort of like the meta level. I guess that's a little bit, fuzzy. Basically, one way that I really like to work to try to get my ideas down is just to keep lots and lots of notes. Those can be voice notes. Those can be a Google Doc that's just a complete hellhole of random ideas, kind of like people used to do back in the 18th and 19th centuries when they would use commonplace book. So a commonplace book was a journal that was completely disorganized by design. It would include visual and written elements. People would write stuff in there, like you'd have little signatures from your friends. Maybe they'd draw a picture of a dog for you, whatever. You'd have it in non-chronological order. And the goal is not to create a record, but just to have a repository of potential inspiration. So when you're coming to try to tell your story, you have all these layers of things that you could jump off from, because it's very hard to start from nothing. The other thing I often recommend with people looking to craft a story or refine a story is to get another person involved. It's very difficult, just like it's very difficult to understand yourself by sitting there and thinking about yourself. It's very difficult to find your story without sharing it with someone else and getting some feedback and finding giving good feedback is as difficult as telling a good story. So it may take some trial and error. Like you may share it with a friend and you're like, that person doesn't really get what I'm doing. And that was like so unhelpful, or they're just like, I don't like it, or yeah, that's beautiful. Oh my God, you're so smart. Like neither of those are very helpful either. So you really got to look for someone who can bounce back with like, often it's a good question, right? Like the best feedback I've gotten from editors of my creative work, for example, has been a question or like, what if we tried this? What if we took it this way? And sometimes those things really open up the door to finding a better way to frame what you're doing. But basically, all you're trying to do is communicate like what you're doing and why. But some of those whys are extremely deep and need a lot of space and time to come out. That's one more thing I'd add is time. Don't rush it. Like really, I I say this. So do as I say, not as I do. But rushing stuff out. I mean, sometimes you have that spontaneous like brainwave, and you're just like, I'm gonna like do a post on Instagram because it's like what I'm thinking about, and it's maybe not a rage post, but just like one that comes from like a place of deep enthusiasm or discernment. But give it time. Give it time. Don't rush your bio. Don't rush your kind of one sheet about your album or your single. Like really try to find interesting ways to talk about what you're doing. And the second you smell a cliche, like nip it in the bud and really say like, what is it actually I'm trying to say? And that's a time-consuming process. So give yourself the time and space. Long answer.
That's great. Well, yeah, no, because actually, it's extremely challenging to tell a genuine, authentic story around a digital tool. Like around a platform. I mean, I know I'm a mission-driven founder. As far as Mostro XYZ, our music platform, I'm building it because I'm a client of it. I built it for me. So for me, my why is very clear. But I can see out there in the digital, in the music tech landscape, not everyone's why is first of all, not everyone's why is the same, and not everyone's mission-driven. Sometimes they're developing something they think that could be useful for others, but not necessarily that they even would necessarily use, right? They're not a musician, but they're developing a tool for musicians because they can see that there's a need in the market for it. And explaining that in a genuine way can be challenging. So it isn't easy. It's very, yeah.
Yeah. Though don't psych yourself out. I mean, sometimes the simplest way of saying something is the best. And especially in English, right? Our language tends to favor clear concision versus like flowery phrases. And some other languages, because they're more complicated grammatically, they can get like I'm thinking about some of the Slavic languages where you can just go crazy with like this huge paragraph that's one sentence, and it makes total sense. If you do that in English, you sound like you're completely out of your mind. So it's saying things simply, even if it's not like super exciting at first, you can, the other thing I like to advise our clients and that I try to practice in my own writing is you can always dial it back. It's really difficult to dial it up. So go crazy. Can I swear on this podcast?
Sure. I mean, the platforms be damned. Go ahead.
Okay, go ape shit crazy. Like no holds barred. Like just go and like do it the way like if you were completely like in your craziest zaniest moment, like write it or frame the story that way if you're thinking more on like video or audio or whatever. But like go nuts, because you can always be like, it's a little too out there. I'm gonna dial it back. Like editing that way is a lot easier than like I need to make it bolder. Like that can be a lot more. I find that requires a lot more energy and can be more challenging. Once you've made it boring, it's hard to make it unboring. So might as well go crazy at first, and then you can really get boring later if that's required by what you're doing. Like if you're running it by an investor, say if you're a music tech firm, your investor may want you to be more boring, and you may have to sort of find a compromise there. But don't start boring. Start wacky, crazy, fun, personal, profound, emotionally engaged, however you want to play it. It will depend on what you're doing, but yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, I'm interested not do it. Why not that? Why not? What other way is there other than the wacky, weird, wild? Let's just let it all hang out. I'm all for that. Okay, let's move on to the future of music consumption.
Oh, Lord.
You've written about shifting trends and how people consume music. So, considering the current trajectory, what do you believe is the next big shift in music consumption, and how should artists and companies prepare?
Oh my goodness. Like that's a really tough question because I think what we're seeing is, and it's really exciting for, I think for some of us, I am a musician myself and I love when people make music. Like I want everyone to make music. If, I mean, obviously I don't want to, no one's going to be forced to make music. Don't worry. But I really would love to see more people making music, even if it's just for themselves, even if it's just for the sheer joy in the moment, because that joy is so accessible and so wonderful, and it unites our minds and bodies and all that. So I really think we're going to see, I mean, and Tatiana Cirisano at Media has written about this. I wrote about this like a year or two ago. We're going to see music that is less static and more fluid, right? So that involves people. It could be something really simple, and it sort of builds on the sort of remix culture, or the like slowed and reverb, or like the sped up sort of nightcore kind of voice stuff. We're going to see more modifications, and there's already platforms that let you do this and share it with friends. But I think my dream is that the industry will finally unlock that from a licensing perspective, and we can really start to see what people actually want to do in that realm when when the chains are down and people can really mess around with music. I don't think everyone's going to become like a crazy mix master. I don't think everyone is going to be composing music from scratch. That is going to be a craft. It's going to remain, just like we still have people that make beautiful tables, even though we have IKEA and Walmart, right? But there's going to be a lot more different layers and possibilities. So, as an artist, I would say, first thing, don't despair. Don't let these weird, some of this tech speak can feel a little bit daunting, especially when you hear certain, like, say, generative AI people who've gotten, hundreds of $1 millions in funding that don't seem to really get that, like, you should have control over the creative product that you make. And we make art it's not just a money question, but it's also a control question, or an artistic right question. So, don't despair. Do your thing, become the very best at what you can do. And as I said, be a little bit unmercenary. I mean, if you're making music for market, like that's a whole other question. And like, that's just not the way I tend to think about things, but go for it. When it comes to sort of more casual consumers and folks that I really think the line between creation and consumption is going to get blurrier and blurrier, at least it's been so, stark for many, many decades, like since recorded music became a thing in the early 20th century. And now I think there's going to be less and less clarity about where one starts and the other stops. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities for artists to make more of a single recorded piece of music. So whether that is working with stems, whether that is, good ways to offer like remix opportunities to fans just for fun, or, I think there's been some really interesting projects in the NFT and blockchain space, involving remixes and authorized remixes, and kind of, giving just enough permission to fans to let them do something cool, but there's still some kind of chain of recognition that allows, the work to be attributed to the originator. So things like attribution are going to be really, really important in this world where we start to see this fluidity and this blurriness. The other big thing that is really important is like all our media are starting to converge, right? So it's not going to be I do think there's a role for just audio. And I think there's a lot of potential, especially in realms of medicine and healing, and other activities that it hasn't quite caught on yet, but is starting to really bubble up and get some acceptance by people like the FDA here in the U.S. There's but there's going to be more and more ways for us to be musical, but with also a visual element that maybe follows along. Like you may be primarily someone who creates in audio or in music, But you'll also have all of these ways of taking that music and kind of fanning it out and turning it into, I mean, and a lot of us musicians are like synesthetic, right? So we've been seeing stuff all along, and now finally we may be able to unleash that side of our creativity without learning, 5 different software platforms and paying tens of $1,000s in post production or whatever. It is getting so much easier to make really cool stuff. Now, again, the licensing questions, legal questions, like the environmental questions of things like AI, since those technologies are deeply entwined in this development, that's all there. Like we have to figure that out. But I do think like the world is going to get more synesthetic. There's going to be a lot of blurriness between consumption and creation, and more people are going to find creative and emotional outlets in audio who were, because of the technical challenges of making good music or even good sounds, are going to find it's a lot easier. They'll be unlocked for them. For good and bad. I mean, that also means there's going to be a lot of like crap out there, bullshit, right? When you say democratize, you're also talking about the nasty stuff. So that's the shadow side. But most humans are not horrible. I don't know. I live by that principle.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a lot of beauty and a lot of, personal satisfaction. And, I dream of emotional healing. The role that is very rarely discussed in the industry of the emotional, psychological magic of music could become more accessible to more people. And that fills me with a lot of hope because we desperately need, grounding, healing forces right now. Again, to get a little woo, but
No, absolutely. More woo all around. I agree. I totally agree. Totally on that trip. I want to ask you, since you've been mentioned, we talked about, you've mentioned blockchain, you've mentioned AI. Well, let's talk about critique of current trends. So you have a macro view on music trend. Which trend do you think is overhyped?
Well, it kind of depends on who you're asking, right? So I see AI as a layer in the creative process, and that is where I've seen it do the most amazing stuff. Though, it is fun to create, like, it's almost like a meme creation type vibe. Like, I got frustrated with something and I generated a song about it the other day, and it was really, really funny. And, everyone in the office laughed and we all felt a little bit better about life. But beyond that, I'm not sure what the actual market for completely generated, tracks is going to be beyond the sort of quirky novelty thing. Though it could be great, again, to inspire people who may not be musicians, who may be writers or movie, filmmakers or content creators of some other kind. That could be inspo. I don't know. So yeah, AI is definitely overhyped, and I do not understand the valuation of certain companies. And when it comes to blockchain, I think there was a misalignment between the dreams that some people had, and they were very cool, persuasive dreams. Like I was like, that's awesome. But they were very, very abstract. That was a struggle I always had. And like, dude, I have a PhD, like I've read a lot of cultural criticism and like anthropology. And I was like, I have no idea what you mean. And I don't think you know what you mean, judging by what you're saying. So all of those dreams that were like kind of percolating and, they were cool. But then like the technology itself was really daunting for a lot of people, right? And so just like setting up a wallet and figuring out what all this means, like again, I think it felt real abstract. And a lot of the technology that's caught on has been something that's like kind of a translation and morphing of an analog or in real life, process. So Instagram made a lot of sense because people knew how to use like a point and shoot camera, right? Blockchain can feel very nebulous and hard to figure out, right? So and there was always this idea like, oh, we need to provide utility, and none of that coalesced quite the way people were hoping, I think, yet. But the cool thing is, now that the hype has died down, I think we've got a lot better chance of a good, rational, reasonable approach that could really yield some benefits. And there's some really cool things that you can do that are difficult in other, technologies. I think we'll see some really neat stuff rising from people just chilling out and building some things. And trying to find like DAOs are really promising. Like I kind of love the idea. I love the concept. And if governance could be worked out, and if people could get used to working in a DAO, like they are with, say, like hippie food co-ops, right? There's a lot of cool options. Like looking at the co-op movement. Sorry to I'm going to go on a little side quest here. I've done a lot of history research. I mean, I'm a historian by training, and I've really interested in the progressive movements of the 19th century here in the U.S. and specifically. And there are all sorts of really interesting attempts to, say, for instance, value labor at its actual value. And there were a lot of cooperatives and interesting ideas around cooperation. And I think that there's a lot to be learned there. And I also see that, DAOs could be a way to take that into the digital realm so you don't have to be physically present to manage that together. And we're gonna need. I think we're gonna need a lot of that emotional support that music provides to like figure this out together. Humans are really difficult to coordinate at times, and we're very we like to get contentious, and there needs to be like an exception, like an understanding that there will be that friction, and that we can't just like engineer our way through the messiness of community, because part of community is making mistakes and having errors and having flaws. And so if we can figure that out within a DAO, I think like that could be a really exciting place where people can really accomplish something interesting together.
I agree. Well, I agree with you.
Did I answer your question? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Yes, you did. And I can tell you, I can actually bounce back on that and just feed in a little information for you and for listeners. So Mostro does have a DAO. My community of interns, I run it as the organization. I'm conscious that the DAO is happening now. We're a group of 6. It is happening now. The white paper will be coming out this fall on how we run. And yes, alternate economic systems valuing labor differently is part of what we're looking at as well in the design. So happy to bounce ideas off of you, Tristra, as I delve into this. I'm also observing DAO, the functioning of a DAO sandbox, put in a proposal to be part of, to do something with the sandbox later on. And as I did that proposal, now I'm also on copy of all of the emails coming in and the conversations happening in that DAO. So seeing how DAOs run is really interesting. I do believe that it's a collective. There are definitely ways of organizing it to making it function where it's a decentralized, autonomous, non-governmental organization where artists and collaborators can all communicate, share in decisions, share in collaborations, creativity, and production of new ideas, new work. And in an pretty much uncompromised, consensus-based, relatively uncompromised way. And so I think the future is there and it's happening. I mean, it really is happening. It's a very exciting place to be. So
Awesome. Yeah, I can really imagine whole new art forms, art collectives sort of arising out of a consensus-based, very diverse, but somehow harmonized, where there's like a process for voices to be heard and for proposals to be accepted and for tensions to be worked out. Like, you really could get a bunch of very, very different people with different skills pulling in the same direction, and it could be really, really interesting and kind of break us out of, like, I feel the arts have gotten kind of stuck in broadcast mode, and with the exception maybe of games, where there is more interactivity, though you're still kind of like sent down a chute, right? Like there's gameplay lets you do certain things, with the exception of, like, I guess open games. Game's that's like an interesting bracket here. I gotta gesture a little bit less crazily. But when it comes to the more traditional arts, it's time, as things converge, as people kind of are feeling this convergence. Like we don't have great mechanisms for talking across media, and it's really difficult if you are wanting to do something that is like not quite visual art, not just music, that has like an interactive component. But that to me is the future. Like that can bring people together in digital realms. That could bring people together in real life where people desperately need to come together and be together and just be in the presence of other humans. And people are, really longing for that in many cases. And I think a different organizational principle might inspire us to, come up with a greater space for like this kind of new creativity that would break us out of what feels like. I think Ted Gioia called it recently. I'm totally butchering his last name. He called it a doom loop culture, which I don't completely agree with. Like, I don't know. Again, as a historian, I'm like, yeah, I get some questions, but it does kind of feel like that right now. Like we're kind of recycling everything. It's just like things are recycled faster and faster until we have like no idea of origin, attribution, or meaning, right? But we desperately as humans want to make meaning. If we don't have meaning, we fall apart psychologically. And maybe something like coming up with new organizational principles could be part of this new meaning-making method. Mem.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, when you think about it, the digital communication platforms that we use are generally run their hierarchical systems and
Absolutely.
by one decision maker at the top, right? We know of two. Well, if we talk about X, Twitter, or Facebook, which is also Instagram and WhatsApp, one person that's at the helm of those platforms, right? And making all decisions, and the platform is basically a reflection of their worldview, of their mindset, and that's what we, in majority, that's what we're working with. So yes,
their aesthetic. I mean, as an artist, like you look at that stuff and you're like, I don't want my stuff on here because it's ugly. I don't want it to be hot. It's like hanging a beautiful painting in like an ugly ass frame that you found like on a tree lawn, and it's like an old plastic beat up poster frame, but you've made this exquisite art. Like, no, like that's how I feel sometimes. Like, why do I have to like be with like this horrible ad for like something like kind of disgusting, or like a weird Temu like t-shirt ad right next to like my thoughtful sonnet on the meaning of life? Like, no.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, that's where Web3 social, which I've moved into, is it feels like the internet when it was fun, and and your own data, etc. So the new, hope is there. New things are coming. We don't all have to have Stockholm syndrome. There are, oh, I saw that a few months ago at a conference, and oh gosh, I'll be talking about that on my on another episode or a blog post, something like that. Oh yeah, but we're here to break people out of their thinking molds and into new ideas, right?
Amazing. Yeah,
it's all coming. And I want to ask you actually about your work with rock, paper, scissors and a content strategy that you may have had, like a particularly challenging content strategy that you developed and executed. What made it challenging? If you can think of an example of that, and what are the key takeaways from that experience that you can share?
Wow. So, not to get too deep into like specific clients, which would be kind of dull, and I don't want to call anyone out or make anyone feel slighted because I didn't mention them. Usually, the toughest things we have are, especially if someone is truly innovative. Like every founder thinks they're doing something really innovative, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. But if you're really bringing something new to market, it is incredibly hard to educate the press about it because they have a bunch of set boxes and slots and ideas, and that's just the way they have to organize their work. This isn't a failure of imagination or curiosity. I mean, many journalists are some of the most curious and interested people that you'll meet, but they have a job to do, and they have to keep information organized, and sometimes that's through rigid categorization that lets them make decisions quickly and write things efficiently. But that is often, for me, has been the toughest, is trying to really get across what makes something unique, or if you have a new product, like, or a new platform that actually does solve a problem that has, it is verifiably like a quality approach to this problem. Journalists get really skeptical, or it's just like, does not compute. I often call it the talking dog syndrome, right? Like, if you met a dog that talked, there'd be probably about 2 reactions roughly. And one would be like, oh my God, this dog is talking. Like, oh, this is the craziest thing. Look, it's a talking dog, blah, blah. And then you're like, you never get to tell, like the dog doesn't get to say what it has to say, right? And then the other reaction is, oh my God, it's a talking dog. I did not see that. I don't know. Dogs don't talk. I can't, So finding a way to like have someone listen to the talking dog it's a really interesting challenge. We usually find that repetition is helpful. So we're always iterating. PR is not quite like marketing where you get to iterate all the time. You're always getting like A/B thing. You have a lot of data to look at. You've got, a lot of great quantitative ways to like evaluate how the response to your work. Here's a little trickier. It's a little more loosey-goosey. But we do try we'll write a press release and we try to make our press releases interesting and lively and, not just like boilerplate, horrible, boring stuff. And then we'll go back and we'll try repitching. We'll pitch different angles. We'll like ask journalists questions. You really try to get at like what is connecting, what's making sense, what is like completely just like so much out there that they don't even want to deal with it. And to try to find a way to let people listen to the dog. But if you're doing something new or something in a space that has been talked about a lot one way, but you're really taking a different approach, you're going to have to repeat yourself a lot. You're going to have to try a lot of things out and see what clicks and be willing to be, sometimes you're going to be misunderstood and then you ask for corrections and sometimes that's a great opportunity. So it is very much a process. You got to just be willing to sort of persistence in PR and probably in marketing too, but definitely in PR is the main quality. Maybe, and then creativity and clarity of communication, but persistence, like don't give up, keep trying.
That's great. Now, so repetition, if we especially have a talking dog, if you're a talking dog, just
Legit up there to the dog. This is a talking dog. This is completely normal. This dog is talking. It has things to say. Fido, over to you.
I love it. I think maybe the third reaction is like, I didn't see that dog.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They just don't even.
Yeah, they just completely can't.
I can't
see it. Yeah.
See it, right?
Yeah.
I can't see it. So I want to wrap this up with a question. We did talk about the future, hopes of trends that may come in. How do you see, given your role in shaping narratives, how do you see the strategy, the trends, things that are coming forth? If it's DAO, blockchain, NFTs, AI, how do you see all of these things impacting the strategies? Rock, paper, scissors, let's say, in the next few years.
PR is remarkably resilient to change. So you kind of change, like you fudge around the margins, but the baseline is you're trying to communicate with someone who is in a role of some kind of authority or a position of of a certain kind of power in the media, though many journalists would not call themselves people in a position of power. But it is really about human connection. And so as modes of human connection shift, we have to shift our methods. But the ultimate thing is to remember there is someone who's a person on the other end of whatever communication method you're using, and to give them the grace, compassion, and due diligence in your homework that allows them to do their job. So you're serving someone else. And as you do that, you have to sometimes, for a while, like Twitter DMs are really big now, or maybe somebody likes to be texted, and you have to bear in mind, like you would with any friend, how you're going to get the best response from them. So in that way, I don't see a lot of change there per se. AI has kind of ruined writing at the moment. I think we're going to have a better cultural understanding as we digest what we actually want from a text. To sound a little like semiotics lecture here, what do we want from the text? The we're going to have a lot of focus, I think, more on style and nuance and how to write like a human and in all the wonderful myriad ways that humans express themselves. So, AI is a good tool to use. Like I said, it's a layer in the creative process, but it should not don't rely on it. Because you're going to sound, you sound like a dork. You sound like, like someone took LinkedIn and like let it write your pitch for you or something. Like, you don't do that. However, I don't know, blockchain could be interesting in that, I could see networks of people establishing themselves, or there could be, I'm kind of trying to think about a new media model that isn't ad-based. And I wonder if there's some potential in something like a DAO, where you have people that almost like, again, like you would a newsroom, have like a sort of an ethical pledge, who have a process that is transparent in that like they talk to people, they vet people, they try to bring in multiple perspectives. There's someone who oversees their work and says like, this sentence is shit, like, or you're editorializing here too much, or like this is completely unbalanced and you can't just do like a fluffy profile of this like very rich person and make them feel good, which is what a good editor does, and asks a lot of questions. So, I mean, I could see like that moving. I mean, and in some ways we're seeing with like things like Substacks and other newsletters, like there's people coming together and communities to try to support each other. There are new outlets starting all the time. Like I love 404 Media. If you're in the tech world and you don't read them, I would totally read them. They're like from, some of them are like X Motherboard and some other online outlets. And their ads are like really low key. They clearly have a very targeted strategy, and it's really cool. So I think there's a lot of interesting potential for decentralized stuff to work. However, there's also a lot of havoc that could be rigged. So again, we're going to need a culture to help us find the information that supports our values. And if we value factual analysis, if we value careful research, if we value thoughtful commentary that takes into account multiple perspectives, like we're going to have to decide that, right? Just like we decide who gets to vote in a DAO, right? So that's sort of the key element. We cannot engineer that. We can try. I good luck. About all the people who've attempted these experiments, I think have failed pretty soundly, partly because I don't think they were very deep emotionally connected people. Sorry, I'm sure there's some really sensitive, wonderfully deep person who's an engineer out there, and I apologize to you directly, but yeah, those are my thoughts on it. So but the fundamental is always people to people.
Yeah.
Stories.
Stories.
Yeah.
Go wacky, unboring stories about talking dogs, cool talking cows and times. They get it. Yes, they love the dog, and they talking dog, and walk the dog.
Yeah, just watch out for my talking dog startup. It's going to launch like any day now.
Can't wait, Tristra. I'm there for it. Fabulous. Thank you so much for being with me today on the podcast. It's been fabulous. I've loved it.
Oh, good. I'm glad we had fun, and I tried to be very unboring.
Dear listeners, I think you'd agree that this has been an extremely unboring episode of the Mostro Podcast, and a big thanks to our guest Tristra Yeager for that. It was so enlightening to hear Tristra's perspectives on adapting storytelling through evolving platforms and her vision for the future of music, technology, and community. Join our community and subscribe. Follow the Mostro Podcast on your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, tune in and turn up for innovation.